competition and the markets. Then we'll be talking about strategic models. Then we would move into internal analysis. So let's dive into it straight away without much ado. So we are talking about competition and markets, So what is a market? I'm sure all of you have been to a market before, but what is a market? A market is simply a place of buying and selling. A place of buying and selling. It does not necessarily have to be a physical location. It can be a location online. So for example, if you look at Amazon, it does not necessarily have a physical location. You buy and sell things online. It's purely online. So a market is a place of buying and selling. A market is a place of buying and selling. The markets could also be localized or globalized. Markets could be localized or globalized. A market could be that localized or globalized. So that's the way you need to think about it. A market is not only a physical location, it can be a location online as well. Then once we've understood market, let's understand what an industry is. An industry is simply a group, consists of companies. These companies are similar in terms of the goods they produce and the services they provide. So an industry consists of companies which produce similar goods and services, basically. And when we say an industry segment, we are referring to a separately identifiable part of a larger industry. A separately identifiable part of a larger industry. Very, very important. So there are types of industries. There are different types of industries. There are fragmented industries. There are emerging industries. There are mature industries, and there are global industries. There are global industries. So let's take them one by one and let's see what they actually mean. So when you say fragmented industries, these are industries that are small and sell to a small portion of the market. They sell to only a small portion of the market. They are small. They are fragmented. So an example is the cleaning services. Then you also have emerging industries. These are industries that have started to develop. They have started to develop. It's possible that they will become well-known in the future, but they've only started emerging. So a typical example is space travel. Right now, people are looking into space travel, as an industry. So that's an emerging industry. Then you also have mature industries. These are industries that have reached the maturity phase of the product life cycle. They have reached the maturity phase of the product life cycle. A typical example is automobiles, cars. They have reached the maturity phase of the product life cycle. Then you have global industries. These are industries that operate globally. They are everywhere. They are on a global scale. Example is football. The professional football industries is literally everywhere. So these are the 4 types of industries that you need to let it be at the back of your mind, right? So anytime you are presented a case, you want to understand what kind of industry is this? Is it fragmented? Is it emerging? Is it a mature industry? Is it a global industry? Then that would kind of help you to assess the situation of the organization that you're looking at. That's very, very key. Then there's a concept under markets and competition that we need to understand, which is called convergence. So this is where 2 or more industries converge and become part of the same industry with the same customer market. So it's 2 or more industries coming together or converging and becoming part of the same industry. So that's the definition of convergence. So it's possible to see 2 or more industries come together and become one industry, become the same industry, and sell to the same customer markets. And what could lead to that? So we have different kinds of convergence. we have demand-led convergence and supply-led convergence. And this will help you to understand convergence a lot more. So demand-led convergence, comes from, it usually originates from customers. The pressure for convergence comes from customers, where customers think of two products as complementary. When customers see that these two products are complementary, then it can lead to a demand-led convergence. It can lead to a demand-led convergence. So that's a typical, situation when it comes to demand-led convergence. Then let's look at supply-led convergence. Supply-led convergence. In my explanation, I said this kind sees a link between different industries and seeks to bridge the gap between those industries. So in supply-led convergence, there's usually a gap that is spotted between industries. And then, it seeks to link, bring these two industries together and bridge the gap. It bridges the gap between those two industries. So a typical example is where you converge entertainment, and telecommunication, voice communication, data communication. Entertainment is one industry on its own. It's a whole industry. But sometimes you can break the telecommunication industry together with the entertainment industry. So you see how this is more of a supply-led convergence. So you see different telecommunication industries partnering with entertainment industries, signing artists to help promote their brand and all that. That's supply-led convergence. So convergence is something important to understand. It could be demand-led or it could be supply-led. And as I've already indicated, if it's demand-led, it means it's originating from the customer. If it's supply-led, then it means that there's usually a gap that is identified between two industries, and what industries would do would be to seek to bridge that gap. If you put the entertainment industry on one hand and you put the telecommunications industry on the other hand, you might think these are two separate industries, but these two industries can come together in order to drive something special or drive their businesses. So that's more about supply-led convergence. So let's move on to industry competition. We've talked about markets a little bit. Let's move to industry competition. And when we are talking about competition, we can't forget about a model we call the Porter's 5 forces model. But first of all, let's understand competition analysis. What exactly is competition analysis? It's basically monitoring your competitors and evaluating their strength. If you remember in our earlier sessions, we talked about strategic position analysis. As part of strategy formulation, we talked about strategic position. And I said that you are looking at your position in relation to your competitors. So then you see it here. It says competition analysis is an integral part of strategic position analysis. It's an integral part. You would want to know who your competitors are. You want to monitor them and evaluate their strength. Very, very key. Very, very key. So one key model that you use to, analyze that is the Porter's 5 forces model, and we'll be delving more into it. So what does it do? It analyzes the strength of competition, and it helps to explain why some industries are more profitable than others. Some industries, it helps to give that explanation. So the Porter's 5 forces model is an in-depth model for understanding competition. So let's move on to what exactly the Porter's 5 forces model is all about. What is it all about? what is it all about? So there are 5 forces basically. And the first force is the threat from potential entrants. The threats from potential entrants. So let me explain that. So you have some of the things that you need to look at here when it comes to threats from potential entrants. You need to look at the barriers to entry. If a new company wants to enter an industry, are the barriers high or low? Is it easy or is it difficult? Are the barriers high or low? So you want to understand the barriers to entry. That's very, very important. And what influences these barriers and make them high or low? So things like capital requirements, for instance, influences the barrier to entry. So if the capital requirements are high, then it becomes difficult for new companies to enter. It becomes difficult. Things like economies of scale influences barriers to entry. Things like government regulation as well. If there are some strict government regulations, and then it becomes difficult, to enter that particular industry. Another thing is technical skills. If there's a certain skill set that is required, and know-how that is required for you to be able to operate successfully in the industry, then, it makes that in itself is a barrier to entry. So threats from potential entrants or influences competition. If people can easily come into an industry, then there'll be more competition. If there are high barriers to entry, then there'll be less competition. So that's the way you need to understand it. And then you also have threats from substitute products. So if you have a product and there's also another substitute product, then it means that that substitute product is going to pose a competition to your product. And this is all influenced by switching costs. How easy is it for a customer to switch from your product to another substitute product? If the switching costs are high, then, obviously the customer can't just move on to another product. If it's low, it means that they can just leave your product and go pursue a substitute product. And all these things help to influence competition. So if switching costs are low, then competition is high. Another thing is that influences threats from substitute products is the performance of the product, of the substitute product. If these substitute products are good enough, then it's easy for customers to move. So think about it, that way. And it helps you to understand how it influences competition, and as well as the relative prices, of these products. So for instance, if you have a product and the product is, let's say, $5, and there's a substitute product that is literally offering the same value for $4, it's easy for customers to make that switch. The third point is what I call the bargaining power of customers. If a customer has a lot of bargaining power, if he has a lot of bargaining power, then what it means is that he can easily, move. He calls the shots. So he can easily move from one organization, one company to another. So things that influence the bargaining power of customers is the volume of purchases, and things like undifferentiated supplier products, things about customer information about suppliers and prices. If the customer has a lot of information about suppliers and prices, that increases their bargaining power. Then switching costs as well. So if a customer has high bargaining power, that obviously impacts, impacts an organization, and therefore it also creates competition. If the customer doesn't have a high bargaining power, their bargaining power is low, their bargaining power is low, then that also has a negative impact on competition. Then you also have the bargaining power of suppliers. The bargaining power of suppliers. And the bargaining power of suppliers, again, is influenced by the number of suppliers. If the number of suppliers are high, their bargaining power is also high. Very, very important. Very, very important. If the number of suppliers are high, then their bargaining power will be high, because there's strength in numbers. There's strength in numbers. So once the bargaining power of suppliers is like really, really high, that is usually influenced by the number and the size of the suppliers and the size of suppliers. Then you also have number of substitutes. If there are lots of substitutes, it means that organizations can switch from a supplier standpoint, can switch from one supplier to another easily. From one supplier to another easily. Another thing that also influences the bargaining power of suppliers is, the last point, which is the importance of the supplier's product in the creation of the end product. How integral or how important the supplier's product is in the creation of the end product also influences the bargaining power of suppliers. Very, very important. The last thing I would like to talk about when it comes to, this framework or this model is the competitive rivalry within the industry. Competitive rivalry within the industry. Competitive rivalry. So within the industry, and that is influenced by the number of competitors. If there are a lot of competitors, then it means obviously there will be rivalry, there will be competition. Another thing that also influences it is whether the rival firms, the product of the rival firms are differentiated. If the products are differentiated, that also has an impact on competition. The third point is that the cost of withdrawing from the industry. The cost of withdrawing. Is it difficult to withdraw from the industry? If it's difficult to withdraw from the industry, then you would rather stay. And that also increases competition. It increases competition. So if the cost of withdrawing from the industry is high, people would rather stay in the industry. And that obviously increases competition. Increases competition. So these are some of the factors, and we'll delve more into this. We would actually use this model to explain, some cases and some case studies that we'll see. So I just wanted you to have a fair overview of this model, a brief overview of this model to understand it from a big picture. So the Porter's 5 forces model looks at threats from potential entrants, threats from substitute products, the bargaining power of suppliers, as well as customers, and also competition or competitive rivalry that exists within an industry. Very, very important to know. Then let's look at the life cycle model. The life cycle model. What is this model? What is it all about? What is this model all about? It's basically talking about the fact that organizations and their products go through a certain life cycle, just like the life cycle of an individual. You start as a baby, you grow to become a child, an adult, and you become old. This is the same logic or the same thinking. So organizations and products have a life cycle. The first stage in the life cycle is introduction, or the introductory phase. there are some things that define or characteristics of this introductory phase. So first off, in the introductory phase, it's usually unprofitable here. Startup costs and running costs are very high, and sales are usually slow. Sales are usually slow on a total level. Sales are usually slow because the product is beginning to pick up. It's just like this is, you can call it a baby, stage. Things haven't started to pick up yet. Then there's a growth phase where demand begins to grow. And because demand is beginning to grow, new entrants are attracted. So there's some form of competition here. And then at this point, companies begin to make some profits. So this is very, very important. This is what happens at the growth phase. Then you also move on to the maturity phase, where sales at this point become stable. You don't see very high growth as you saw in the growth phase. Sales has become stable and profits stabilize, basically. This is like a maturity phase. Things begin to stabilize and there's literally little opportunity for growth. And the way you can improve profits at this stage is through differentiation. You have to differentiate your product. In order to make some profits. And in order to be distinct from the competition, you need to differentiate your products. Then there's the decline phase where sales begin to fall and companies leave the market. So these are 4 important stages, of the life cycle that you need to understand: the introductory phase, the growth phase, the maturity phase, and the decline phase. Some key characteristics that happen across this is you would see, depending on the stage you're in, it will impact your sales, it will impact your profits, and it will also impact the competition, the kind of competition that exists within these different phases. So it's important to understand this as well. So what are the cost implications of the product life cycle? What are the cost implications? There are different costs associated with the product life cycle. For example, training costs, machinery costs, marketing costs, R&D costs. These are different costs that are associated with the product life cycle. Every stage has its own costs. So let's talk about the product development stage. At the product development stage, the main costs that you have here are the research and development costs. Here you are making a lot of investments. So your capital expenditure, your research and development, trying to come up with a new product, these are some of the costs you see here. Then once you introduce the product to the market, the kind of costs you would be seeing here is the operating costs, Then the next phase, which is the growth phase, the kind of cost you would see here are the capacity costs, cost to improve capacity, working capital costs as well. Here at this stage, you want to improve capacity. Then you also have the maturity phase. What's the maturity phase? What kind of cost do you incur here? Just think about it. At this point, you would incur a lot of marketing costs, product enhancement costs, and you also incur costs to maintain capacity. At the growth phase, you incur costs to improve capacity. At the maturity phase, you incur costs to maintain capacity. Then there's also the decline and withdrawal stage. At this stage, some of the costs you incur here are restructuring costs, asset decommissioning costs. These are all costs you incur in order to leave the industry or leave the market. So these are some of the stages and their respective costs. The reason why I'm mentioning this is, as business, you need to understand these costs and how you would manage them. Very, very key. Very, very key. So what are some of the benefits, of this life cycle model? What are some of the advantages? What are some of the advantages? The first thing you can think about here is that you can assess the potential profitability of products. It helps you to assess the potential profitability of products. So this model helps you to go through the life cycle of a product, and it helps you to understand, okay, what are the potential profits I could be making from this product. Another thing is that this model also helps you to understand the costs associated with each stage of the product's life, like we discussed earlier. So helping you to understand these costs, you can devise strategies or techniques that you can use to reduce the costs. Another thing is that once you develop this product life cycle, you can actually monitor your actual performance against your plan. So maybe you know that this was your plan, you mapped out the product life cycle, and this was going to be your plan, right? And then when actually you do the product rollout and actual results begin to trickle in, then you can compare your actual performance, the actual performance of the product to the plan. Through the product life cycle as well, because this is, a model that helps you to understand the phases that your product goes through. Even before introduction, you can, begin to formulate pricing strategies before you enter production, because you've envisioned the life cycle of your product and you're able to assess that, okay, this is the kind of, price strategy I need to be able to accomplish, my product objectives. So the product life cycle is relevant to strategic management in two ways. It's relevant in terms of timing, when to enter the market and when to exit. It helps organizations to understand that, there's an appropriate time to enter the market. If you enter the market at the wrong time, your product will probably be killed. And it also helps for you to understand, competition, who you are competing with, help you to understand and analyze your competition. So these are some of the advantages of the product lifecycle model. So we are talking a lot more about competition. So let's talk about the cycle of competition. Yeah, basically through that is a concept for understanding the behavior of competitors. What's the behavior of your competitors? How do they behave? When you increase price, how do they react? When you decrease price, how do they react? You want to understand the behavior of your competitors. Very, very key. Another thing you need to know is that competition affects price and quality. Competition definitely affects price and quality. So there are two things that are important to touch on. That's important to touch on. So first off, if competition is high, in a certain industry, there are different ways rival companies might respond. Rival companies might start to respond by selling their product at a lower price. Or they might also respond by improving their product quality. That's why we say that competition affects price and quality. If there's intense competition, there are two things that organizations will be looking at. Okay, should we increase price? Should we decrease price? Or should we improve our quality? These are strategic decisions that organizations tend to take. when it comes to the matter of competition. So that's what we'll be looking at for this session, and we'll be continue a lot more deeper into the strategic models. I hope you enjoy the session, and you can hit the subscribe button. I'll be posting more videos. I want to see you pass your strategic case study exam, and so just stick and stay with me. Just go through these lectures and study, study your books, and you should be able to pass. We'll be going through past questions, and everything would be fine. Trust me. Thank you very much, and see you in the next session.